Hey guys, Abby here. Welcome to another Borderlands 3 explained video. This one is all about elemental damage, how it affects you, and which elements you should use against health, shield, and armor. I'm also going to provide some tips and strategies for using elemental damage in Borderlands 3. There are 5 elements in Borderlands 3: shock, radiation, fire, corrosive, and cryo. There are also weapons with no element, otherwise known as kinetic. Each element has its own unique effect, as well as advantages or disadvantages against shields, armor, and flesh. We'll go over the exact numbers later in the video, but first let's go over each element and take a look at their unique status effects. Shock damage can cause targets to be electrocuted. Electrocution deals very high damage over a 2-second duration. When you're electrocuted, you'll see the shock damage effect on the sides of your screen. When the enemy is electrocuted, you'll see kind of a bluish electrocution look to them, and they'll kind of make noises as if they were electrocuted. Radiation damage can cause targets to become irradiated. Irradiated enemies deal aura damage to nearby enemies for 8 seconds. If an irradiated enemy dies, they explode, irradiating all enemies damaged by the explosion. When you're irradiated, you'll see yellowish bubbles at the bottom of your screen. When the enemy is irradiated, they kind of get a yellow glow to them, and you'll see them explode whenever they die in kind of poofs of radiation. Incendiary damage can cause targets to ignite. Ignited enemies take high damage over a 5-second duration. When you're on fire, you'll see flames at the bottom of your screen. When the enemy's on fire, you'll see them have kind of an orange glow. You'll see the fire, and they kind of make noises like they're on fire. Corrosive damage can cause targets to melt. Melting deals high damage over a 5-second duration. When you're melting or taking corrosive damage, you're going to see a green effect at the top of your screen. When the enemy is melting, you'll see the kind of green glow surrounding them. Cryo damage slows enemies and eventually freezes them. Frozen enemies are unable to move, and they take 3 times melee damage. Cryo is great for crowd control, and I also have a whole video just about cryo efficiency, so I'm going to link that below if you guys are interested in more information about cryo. When you're affected by cryo, you'll see a freezing effect at the top of your screen, and when enemies are affected by cryo elemental damage, they'll start to turn white and they kind of slow down their attacks or their movement, and eventually they freeze. It's also important to keep in mind that in most cases you're going to be doing multiple elements of damage onto the target, whether that is from your anointments on your shield, grenade, or weapon, or from your pet if you're playing flak. So if you're wondering what elemental damage you're doing to the enemy, you can always look at the numbers that pop up, your damage numbers from shooting them or throwing a grenade, or your action skill damage. And those numbers are going to be colored different based on what the element is. So here we are at the test dummy in Sanctuary, and we're going to be using the Hell Shock in Shock. And it has on action skill, and the next 2 magazines give you additional cryo damage. And then we also have a corrosive anointment on our shield and a radiation anointment on our grenade. And then our racks are actually going to be doing fire damage. So I'm going to be able to show you all 5 elements: radiation, corrosive, shock, cryo, and fire on one enemy by shooting one gun. So we throw our action skill, and then we can see the rest of the elements there. So in our photo mode, you guys can actually see that when we throw our racks, we get corrosive damage from our shield, we get fire damage, the 22k from our racks, and then we get an additional radiation damage tick as well from our grenade. And then after we throw our racks, we should get shock from our gun, cryo from our next 2 mags anoint on our gun, and then corrosive and radiation as well. So everything but fire. The fire damage is coming from our racks. So here, if we zoom in on the numbers from after our action skill, you guys can see that we've got corrosive, radiation, cryo, and shock on here. Everything but fire, basically. Sometimes it's a little difficult to differentiate between fire and radiation, and to differentiate between shock and cryo, but you can see kind of a more white number versus a blue, and a more yellow number on there since we don't have fire right now. All right, now for the numbers. So each element, including kinetic damage, has specific advantages and disadvantages to health, shield, and armor bars. And a huge thanks to Admiral Baru, who I believe was the first person to really nail down the exact percentage damage gained and lost for each element. These bonuses also change depending on which story mode you're in. So currently we have normal Vault Hunter mode and True Vault Hunter mode in the game, and here are some charts that I've made to illustrate the in-game percentages. First up, we're going to take a quick look at normal Vault Hunter mode, which is your first run through of the story. Feel free to screenshot this chart, but we're actually going to move on to True Vault Hunter mode as the in-depth example, since most people at this point are probably on to that story mode. Both of them are pretty similar, but you just get more of an advantage or disadvantage based on the element that you're shooting. But just know that it's more important to match in True Vault Hunter mode. Also remember that these elemental advantages and disadvantages will also affect you as a Vault Hunter, so keep that in mind when looking at elements that have advantages against shields and health bars. So here are the bonuses for True Vault Hunter mode. As you can see, they're more extreme than normal mode, which means that using the correct element is even more important. Against flesh, aka health, aka the red bar, incendiary damage is increased by 75%. Kinetic, radiation, and cryo are neutral to health, whereas shock and corrosive receive a 35% decrease in damage. Against shield, aka the blue bar, shock damage is increased by 150%, radiation damage is increased by 50%, and kinetic is neutral. Incendiary, corrosive, and cryo all receive a 50% decrease in damage against shields. Against armor, aka the yellow bar, corrosive damage is increased by 75%, cryo damage is increased by 50%, and all other elements, even kinetic, receive a decrease in damage against armor. This is why it's so important to make sure you're using the correct element for each enemy's weakness. However, we know that endgame is full of enemies with multiple shield, health, and armor bars, so here are a few tips on how to use elements to your advantage and be prepared. First, if your character has a relatively short action skill and a fast cooldown, look for shields and grenades with the anointment on action skill end. Gain 50% bonus elemental damage with weapons for 10 seconds. This will add additional elemental damage regardless of what weapon you're holding. If you're mobbing, use complementary elements that work well with your weapon element. For example, if you're shooting a corrosive weapon, you could use anoints that give shock and incendiary. This will allow you to do all three elemental types and allow you to melt the enemies down regardless of the enemy type and how many bars they have. If you're fighting bosses with specific weaknesses like Grave Ward and Fire, you can also stack elements that do well against that particular boss. Another example is bonus corrosive damage from your shield anointment while you're using a corrosive weapon against Agonizer. It's just going to allow you to do more corrosive damage against the armor bar. Just make sure you're not using the same elemental anointments on both your shield and grenades because they do not stack. This also illustrates why I like using cryo weapons with Gamma Burst Flak. Flak's weapon anointment, while Gamma Burst is active, gain 115% bonus radiation damage, adds a lot of radiation damage for shields and health, and the cryo element of the weapon works well against armor bars, and it also provides crowd control. The same works with radiation weapons, and Zane's anointment, while Sentinel is active, deal 100% bonus cryo damage. So those are just a couple of examples, and that is why my favorite element combo in Borderlands is actually radiation and cryo. Neither of these elements suffer a damage decrease against health bars. They're also great for mobbing due to their effects. However, for boss kills, make sure to match their weaknesses as best as possible. Make sure to keep an eye out for bosses that are resistant to certain elements. For example, Rampager cycles through resistances each phase. Both Trants have resistance to the elements that they shoot, and Wotan is resistant to cryo. There are also two shields that will give you immunity to elemental status effects. The first is the Transformer shield. It gives you immunity to shock, and it's a great all-around shield for every Vault Hunter. The second is the Red Suit shield, which will give you immunity to radiation, but it has a really low capacity, so I found that it can be a little underwhelming in Mayhem 4. You can also find the perk resistant on your shield that will boost that shield's elemental resistance. So it'll be around 30%, I believe. However, even if you stack element specific resistances like on your artifact and you get to over 100%, you will not be immune. There's some sort of diminishing returns there for elemental resistances, so just keep that in mind as well. And then I would always recommend that if you are going for a high elemental build, make sure you stack those elemental damages from your gear, and also look into artifacts like the Icebreaker and the Flesh Melter and the Atom Bomb. Those all work really well with the elements that they boost. And overall, just have fun using elements in Borderlands 3. Alright guys, that was it for the elements explained. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope you learned something. If you enjoyed the video, definitely give me a thumbs up. It helps the channel out a lot. We are almost at 10K subscribers and I freaking can't believe it. So definitely hit that sub button if you haven't already, and leave a comment down below if you have any more questions. Also, I stream on twitch.tv/AbbyHour Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday at 8 p.m. Eastern time, and I am always open to answering questions while live, so come on over and say hi, and I will see you in the next video. Bye bye.